Thank you for coming. So tonight, the main thing that I want to talk about is what is the suite of climate resilient trees for a future, and that might survive without irrigation, without a lot of inputs. I'm going to start by just briefly getting into how I got to take the kind of approach that I did. This is Science on Tap, so I want to briefly talk about science. And science primarily serves money, power, and empire. And it's a tool that can be used for good. And I love it. My mom is here tonight, and she's a scientist, and was my entry into thinking about science. And she used to send me her journal articles that I would read. And when I get to the end of a peer-reviewed publication, my main thing is it didn't say anything about how we could use science to do good to help people and nature. And I would say, can you try putting that in some of your peer-reviewed publications? And at first she was a little resistant, and then she started trying to do it. And it was really cool to see. So can we use it to serve people and the land? Can it be balanced by traditional indigenous ecological knowledge and love and religion and spirituality and ethics? Some things that I love about science is the idea that all knowledge is provisional. To me, that's humble. And I think we really need humility right now. And the idea there's no proof, and questioning everything, listening to all voices and data. And it's kind of tangential here, but trusting long-standing is a principle that we'll talk about a little later. Nature's wisdom versus human cleverness. I've been going out for 30 years, to this place in Kansas called the Land Institute that uses the prairie as a model to develop a perennial polyculture grain agriculture. And what they have done is they look at how does a prairie work? What is its structure and function? And how can we design our agricultural systems so that they stop eroding the soil? Many people don't know. Every acre of soil in the US averages losing 5 tons of soil a year. We've lost half of all the soil on Earth. It's probably the most serious issue. And so they've found a way. They developed a perennial, almost a perennial wheat, a perennial grain. And many of you, if you're familiar with the Palouse, over 100 tons of soil an acre can be lost on some of those wheat fields. It's really tragic. I realized at 19 that I'm deeply harmful and complicit in kind of wiping out life on Earth. And it just struck me. I plunged into depression and pain. And when I learned also that we have destroyed almost all the native ecosystems of Western Oregon, particularly in the Willamette Valley, I didn't know how to deal with the pain of it all. It hurt. And one of my writing mentors, Wendell Berry, said a quote that Aldo Leopold said before him, which is, "For those who can see, we live among punishments and ruin." That's where we are. We've ruined almost all the native ecosystems and converted them to money production facilities. And so how do we change that? How do we get back to ways of growing trees that take care of people and nature? At first, the pain was too much. And and I lashed out at everybody. Sorry, Mom. She was around for that. But then I read in poetry this line that really helped me. It said, "Sad sons of the stormy fall, no escape, you have to inflict and endure." And what I interpreted that to mean is that describing my situation. Born and raised into this culture, that I'm not, before I die, going to get out of being a harmful person. And I have to endure knowing that I'm complicit in all this harm. And so how do I get out of that? And another line in the poem really helped me with that. he handles in autumn the germs of far future spring. And what that meant to me is that, like, we're in fall now, we're in autumn. Crash may be coming. Things are likely to get worse. Most of us think so. And there's very little disagreement about that. And what can we really do? And so that's the germs of far future spring, is we can try and build cultures that take care of people and nature, and that in every field that there is, we can start to try and make it sustainable, try and make it be in the service of healthy people and healthy ecosystems. You know, our dilemma is that we're born into this suicidal culture, just lighting the tree of life on fire. We're in a mass extinction event. Just in the Willamette Valley, you know, we've wiped out all these beautiful species, possibly 400 to 800 species of bumblebees just in the Willamette Valley. We don't even know, because we've never bothered to research it. And the only response that I've found where I can feel okay is to try and contribute somehow to something different. In my case, it's trying to focus on the suite of trees for a climate resilient future. And I call that reinhabitation, an attempt by people like me, raised in these failed suicidal lifeways, to build cultures and economies that take care of people and nature, where we start to get the things that we need locally as much as we can. And all fields, I think, need to start working on this, where we end up where we're members and not masters in the land community. So why talk about climate? Everyone talks about climate. It's seen as such a huge deal. I started ranting about it in 1987. Again, sorry, Mom. And then this book came out in 1989 that we all thought, people are going to start caring. And now it's 2025 and people seem to care less than ever. Does anyone really care and be willing to sacrifice and change their lives? Is climate really the issue? I think the main issue is our way of life, and if we change our way of life to be more sustainable, climate issues will be solved. Most of our issues will be solved. The one on the left is my top 10 in the order that I think they account for causality. And some things that, just some examples of some changes. What if we made a 50-mile supply line? What if we had our trees, instead of being clones owned by giant corporations, we grew them from seed? And we use traditional crop breeding like they do at Dorena to develop strains of trees. What if we paid our workers well and didn't poison them? I know so many tree workers who eat paraquat-laced food because they're eating right out of the plant rows. These are some of the ethical considerations that I hear nobody talk about almost ever in urban forestry. And I'll talk about these or give a presentation at a conference, and there's really not that much interest. So I'm going to take an approach that comes from that author, Wendell-Berry, to try and look at how you make things better in a given area. And, that involves looking at what was here, what is here, and what will nature help us do here. There have been people here somewhere between, we can document back 15,000 years. I suspect more like 25 to 250,000 years there's been people here. And the only positive example of a culture acting well and treating the land well we have is the Kalapuya. And then with the sea otter trade and initial contact in Astoria in 1789, mass chaos and violence began. And starting with the pioneer phase and the agrarian phase, industrialist phase, and now we're in the hyper-industrialist consumer capitalist phase. What was here in the land are these amazing prairie, savanna, wetland complex ecosystems managed by the Kalapuya. Just one example, the wetland systems when the Willamette River, before we made it a pipe and it was connected to the floodplain, there were possibly 40 to 80 million western pond turtles in the Willamette Valley. Now there's a couple hundred being eaten by bullfrogs. So massive richness, 2 million acre prairie savanna grassland complex. And when the fall rains came, right after the burns and the green grass was coming up, millions of geese would descend and we're an incredible food source, but the timing of it all, it was just amazing. The skill of the land managers, the Kalapuya, is like nothing that all our PhDs combined can't even see the kind of relationships between insects and plants and things like that. There was a lot of climate change that we'll talk about in a minute here. And then the Wisconsin glaciation from about 10 to 110,000 years ago so we were in a colder period. And then massive transition happened at the end of that. And we'll talk about the Younger Dryas and some other climate things. But around 10,000 years ago, the Earth started heating really rapidly. And we think that the prairie savanna ecosystem could have developed without human intervention between about 6,000 and 10,000 years ago. We can document that Kalapuyan burning became intense and annual by 4,000 years ago. The Kalapuya and the land co-evolved healthy cultures and economies in this area, and the richness is indescribable. There's, I go and try and find the little relic pockets because they're so beautiful. 80+% of food and goods was attained within 30 miles probably. Most of the trade was in native products like camas, salmon, hooligan. And cultural fire continues to be seen as how you care for land. Most people classify Kalapuyans as hunter-gatherers, and they dismiss the amazing horticulture they had with camas, some kinds of clovers, all kinds of different plants that were managed by increasing improving the conditions for them so that they did better. And the horticulture was just amazingly skilled, and so it actually created benefits for birds and insects and pollinators and all kinds of things. As I mentioned, the river was connected to the floodplain. There were intact ecosystems. As far as we know, there were no extinctions between 9,000 years ago and until the white man arrived here. They're not even one way in archaeology you can see if humans are impacting the land is creatures that are harvested will get smaller. And there's no evidence for that. You can find that on the coast in shell middens, but not here in the valley. The primary ecosystems was this giant 2 million acre prairie. And it's nothing compared to the Midwest out in the Land Institute. They had 400 million acres of prairie. And now there's like these little 5,000 acre chunks left. It's kind of like that here, but on a smaller scale. And the imperial tree in this region is Doug fir, which will dominate almost every land surface if allowed to. The Kalapuya didn't let that happen, which allowed for vastly richer ecosystems. So, borrowing from Donald Rumsfeld, I'm gonna list some known and unknown unknowns, as he said, that we just, we don't know what's gonna happen. I personally think humans will start biogeoengineering on a large scale. We're already dumping giant amounts of iron in the ocean. That seems to work for cooling, and doing several other things. However, humans, in my view, are likely to cause unexpected things to happen as they try massive engineering projects. We don't know if our annual summer drought that I'm going to be talking a lot about from this North Pacific high pressure system that develops off our coast and makes us a Mediterranean climate, could go away as these giant ocean circulatory systems are slowing. And so that would turn Scandinavia into solid ice if it happens over there. It could change our climate entirely here, and we don't know what's going to happen. Anyone who tells you that they know, you know that they're untrustworthy. Massive ice sheet collapse is what has caused the largest rapid temperature increases and decreases in time, except for volcanic eruptions and meteor impacts. And so the Younger Dryas, around 12,900 years ago, when the Earth was warming suddenly, dropped a giant amount of ice and water into the ocean, and we think the Earth cooled by 10 degrees Celsius in 10 years. And then at the end of that, it warmed by 10 degrees Celsius in 10 years. Don't believe climate activists who tell you that change is unprecedented. There are many unprecedented things, but not the rate of temperature change. I could spend all day on this graph. I love it, and it's for science geeks because it's logarithmic, if you know what that means, so that the scale changes from left to right in time. And so this starts around when land terrestrial life began, around 500 million years ago, when the first bony fishes started crawling out of the water and eventually became humans. And so on the far scale at 500 million years ago, and you can see that left section is 400 million years. And so that's 80% of the last 500 million years were much warmer than now. Much warmer than now. And then you can see that the next one goes from 100 to, goes from about 90 million years ago to about 15 million, about 7.5 million years ago during the Paleocene, Eocene, Oligocene, and Miocene. Those were also much warmer than now. In Eastern Oregon during that time, you can, at John Day fossil beds, you can find ginkgos, many warm temperate species out there. And then you can see around 6 million years ago, the Earth starts to cool. That's the theory in anthropology of where humans came from. That's when the primates left the trees and ventured onto the savanna and the prairie because of this giant cooling that turned the Earth towards grasses from trees. And then you can see at where it says 1,000, or a little bit to the left of there at 2.5, that's the beginning of the Pleistocene, and we're still in the Pleistocene. The Pleistocene is driven by these giant astrogeophysical processes, which eccentricity, obliquity, and precession. And those giant processes of the Earth moving on its axis, the way the Earth is rotating, all these different processes create this cycle we've been in for 2.5 million years, where you get 100,000 years of ice age and 10,000 years of warm. And that's repeated 25 times. And we are, without human-induced warming, we've been cooling for 5,000 years towards another ice age. And then you can see the spike on the far right, where it goes up. And can you see, I actually have a pointer right there, the Eemian. That's from 110 to 120,000 years ago. And the Earth, it warmed almost to, on the far right, those dots on the line on the far right, those are the International Committee on Climate Change predictions for climate change. Top one's near worst case, the bottom one's middle of the road. And so you can see they're about around the Eemian warming. And so all the plants and stuff that, trees, vegetation that are here now have been through massive warming and cooling. They're adapted to it. They can handle it. It's just like the opposite of what I was saying earlier. The climate activists are right. It's the rate of change that is really hard for them, and that's why we'll talk about assisted migration later. We have had change that is more than what's happening now. In that younger dryad that I was talking about, younger dryas. The Anthropocene is what we're moving towards calling this era, and it just feels arrogant to me that, it's true, humans have so much power that we're going to name our geological era after ourselves. But I'm not going to do it. I'm going to keep saying we're in the Pleistocene, and that we're coming to the end of the Holocene, and we're heading into something new that we don't know what it was. What I'm going to talk about next is what is another reason why I'm going to make a pitch for a regionally adapted approach to planting is that during those 25 times that you can see, my mom used to always say everything moves in waveforms. This is such an example of that. And within each of these, within this right here, there were hundreds of warming and cooling periods that were smaller, all the way down to 20-year cycles, up to this 100,000, 10,000-year cycles. The big ones within the ice ages were called stadials and interstadials. The stadial is another mini ice age, and an interstadial is a warm period between it. And so from 1400-ish roughly to about 1850, when the first colonial people arrived here, we were in the Little Ice Age. And so many of you may not know, but we used to have frost in the summer here then. Right here in Cottage Grove, Charles Fremont, riding a horse through this area in 1836, I think, recorded a frost on September 1 here in Cottage Grove. And so what I want to point out is that for 2.5 million years, the Earth has been cooling and warming and cooling and warming. And every time it cools, there are these two giant vegetation provinces, we call them, the Vancouveria floristic province and the California floristic province to the south. And when it warms, the California one moves north, and when it cools, the Vancouveria one goes south. And where are we here in space and time? We are on the southern tip of that Vancouveria one, and just over the hill from here into the Umpqua drainage is the California floristic province. And that, if it could, if trees could run, then the trees of that, like in the quiz, the California Bay laurel is an indicator species of the California floristic province. That would be native north of Portland now. Climate's changed that much. And so, but they can't run. And so someone puts it in their pickup truck and digs one up and drives it to Salem. And now California Bay laurel is spreading through the alleys, through yards, everywhere in Eugene, Cottage Grove, Portland, Salem. And that's because it belongs here, because it's adapted to climate change. 30? And so what I want to get across with this is that this is the Vancouveria floristic province, and this is the California one. You can see this little nook right there that goes north, and that's that nook of California vegetation that comes just north of Medford. And right there. I'm nervous and my hands are shaking. So those continually move north and south, and so we need to take advantage of that. That's nature's wisdom that I was talking about earlier, is that the plants move north. And so we think that Redding area during the Eemian, the plants from around there were in central Washington. And so California Bay laurel was near the Canadian border. And so these trees can move, but they can only move as fast as jays and crows and woodpeckers and other animals, chipmunks, can move them without our help. And now the climate's changing so fast that, for instance, around here, red maples are dying. Western red cedar is dying everywhere in hot inland valleys. So many of our trees are starting, and Doug fir is on its way out in many areas. And it'll survive on the thick soils, the really rich soil lowlands. But you can see in Eugene on Spencer Butte, it's dying in a ring around the top where the soil is thin, and as you go down slope, they're healthy again. So the big thing is that these move north and south, and they're used to it. So what is Cottage Grove going to be like in 2050? We used to say 500 miles south of here, roughly Sacramento. Then we started saying Stockton. Then we started saying Modesto. Then we started saying Fresno. Now the predictions are 800 miles south of here by 2050. So that's Bakersfield. Anyone from Bakersfield? Oh, there's one. It gets hot in Bakersfield, and they get about 9 inches of rain. There's sagebrush in Bakersfield. Moving on to what is here, most people live in the cities in the inland valleys. That's where power is consolidated. That's where the people are. That's where all our major cities are. And we're experiencing really rapid climate change. And the climate change has gone like this, and it's about to go like that. And so we're going to see things that are inconceivable to most of us in the next 20 years. And we'll be seeing massive die-off of trees. I expect most of the conifer forests in Western Oregon to burn in catastrophic fires. We're going to see really major changes. That 2 million acres of grassland savanna complex that Kalapuya manage has basically been turned into cities, farms, roads, and buildings, and shopping centers, pavement, and lawns. 20% of the city that I live in is lawn. We've severely compacted almost all our urban soils so that they're not very productive. And much of our rural soils as well on ag land. And then the trees that we buy and sell and plant are in this supply and demand system of capitalism where the driving force is to maximize the throughput of money. And so that's what's pushing things. The supply and demand curves that people talk about. So supply is driven by us, who are the least knowledgeable about plants and subsistence skills and how to use them and how to plant and grow things of any people in human history. And so we're really easily malleable to marketing campaigns and to pretty things. And so pretty much what we plant and grow are things that we get a little hit of, when we see a color or an ornamental characteristic to it, and it's sold to us like this is going to make us feel something. And then the supply side is the nursery industry grows what they're driven by capitalism, but in industrialism, which primary focus is volume. And so the goal of the nursery, I used to do presentations with the leading plant breeder of urban trees in North America named Keith Warren, and I would be the wacko, and he would be the established person who breeds trees. And he started every presentation that I did with him by saying, my favorite tree is the tree that sells the most. And that's really what it comes down to. So the #1 selling tree in North America right now is Red Point TM Red Maple, trademarked. The genetics are owned by J. Frank Schmidt and Sons in Boring, Oregon, and they get an 80-cent patent fee for all, I forget if it's 15 million of them that they sell every year. And so they want a tree that can maximize volume with low margins, and so you can make about $1.20 a tree. But if you sell 15 million, you're doing pretty good. And so that's what's driving the system. So most of the trees that we plant are for ornamental values. They're not for positive functional values. Well, I do consider our emotional well-being, which is related to ornament, to be a positive thing. And so I think we can justify some of the harm we do for our emotional well-being. But trees are essentially consumer goods to be collected. We describe some buyers of trees as collectors. They want one of this and one of that, and they go to nurseries and they pick to add to their collection. And question, comment?
Yeah, I'm just curious why timber companies are still planting Douglas fir in this area.
Because you can make more money than any other thing on it.
Well,
and in a rotation, 35 years, you can get a harvest. But they're switching to redwood in some cases because they think you could maybe make more.
Right, well, where I live, which is in the Umpqua, most of it was Douglas fir. And I asked timber managers of these countries why they were planting them with climate change. And a couple people said there isn't climate change. But I'm just curious, if in 2025 things are going to be completely different, why do the timber companies stay on track with the Douglas fir?
They are switching to different, what? Well, they're trying redwood. I don't think redwood's going to be successful in the long run because it's hard to transport water in our dry summers to the top of the trees, but they're having good luck with them so far. But they're changing the genetics of the Doug fir in the commercial plantations. And so, for instance, they're going down in elevation and going south and taking trees from those nurseries, which is an adaptive response if you insist on continuing to grow Doug firs. But I'm going to keep it moving here. And so almost all the trees in Cottage Grove that have been planted by humans, 80% of all the trees in our cities are planted by nature, not humans. So those are the Doug firs and other things that line the hills usually in Eugene, Springfield, Cottage Grove. And 20% are planted by humans. Those are the ones that line our streets and in our yards and all those things. Almost over 90% of them are not adapted to our climate. They're from summer rainfall climates in the Appalachians, in Western Europe, and in East Asia. Almost all of the trees are from there. And so we predict that many of them will die. We're already seeing it with the most popular tree in North America, red maple, is dying in marginal areas across Eugene. On my street in Eugene, almost all the red maples have died or are dying. Plant genetics, as I mentioned, are largely owned by corporations. So they find some weird mutant in a nursery bed and clone it, patent it, and they own those genetics. And I'll leave it to you to decide the ethics of that. All cities where we almost all live are, from an ecological perspective, just wastelands. There's very little life compared to what was here under Kalapuya management, where we had these incredibly diverse prairies. We had wetlands. It was a different world. And sometimes when I'm biking around Eugene, I'll rate trees on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of their health at high speed. So I'll try and do 50 in like 120 seconds. And then I do a probability, I do a ratio of what percent are well cared for or healthy. And it's usually pretty low. It's 40 to 60% are in good shape. And so much of our cities, as I mentioned, 20% of Eugene is lawn, bark mulch, and ornamental plants. The potential for trees and plants that could be serving our health. One of the biggest growth fields in urban forestry is public health benefits of trees to children. And what we're finding is they're immense. Kids can focus better in school. Their blood pressure is much lower. Their attentiveness is much higher. It's kind of amazing what looking at plants can do. We only have one positive example here, and that's the 9,000 years of quality management by the Kalapuya. And to me, the revitalization work that different tribes are doing is the most exciting work happening in North America. And thanks. And so I argue for giving land, money, and power to the Grand Ronde, Siletz, Coquille, and Cow Creek tribes locally, and more widespread than that around the country. Where are we? Are we there? I love bioregionalism. I love this flag. Something about it just feels right to me, but this is wrong. This idea is that our region is the region of Doug firs' range, which goes out east of the Rockies. And I don't think that's right. I'm going with the range of Oregon white oak, and which this map isn't right. It actually goes all the way down to Baja. And this I love these oaks in this photo. These are the most like oaks under Kalapuya management in the city of Eugene. And I learned to ride a bike on training wheels looking at them, and I still go and look at them, and we just planted some oaks a couple weeks ago next to them. The other thing that we might want to adapt to if we cared to be locally adapted is our soils. And this woman in the photo here is a brilliant BLM scientist who traced the soils in our wetlands to the explosion of Mount Mazama 7,700 years ago, and that deposited 10 feet of ash right here, all the way over the continental shelf of the ocean. And have you ever dug down and encountered the gray pottery clay in certain places? You can still find that where the flooding rivers haven't scraped it away. That ash broke down into that clay, and she was able to trace it by chemical molecules. So moving on to what will nature help us do here? And so I've been trying to figure that out for a really long time and tried a bunch of different things. And really the best thing is to learn, in my view, by doing and failing at things. And we partnered with my friend Chris up in Portland, who came up with, was also working on the same problem, created a group called Tomorrow's Urban Forest, looking at what trees might survive without irrigation and climate change. I'll show you that we came up with this 3-tier approach. What's really happening out there in the world are these 3 approaches. One is that collector mentality. It's interspecific diversity. So the most, in ecology, there's all these different kinds of diversity, and the kind of shallowest one is just the raw numerical one. It's just the most number of species. And so my group, Friends of Trees, Portland chapter, kind of follows approach number 1. They just get everything in the J. Frank Schmidt nursery catalog and offer it, and plant it out in the street and see what happens. And Portland has some of the best soils in the world from the Missoula floods, so you can get away with a lot there, but their time's coming. And then the nursery industry, in the interest of volume, has chosen to select the trees that they breed into their sales items, their Red Point red maples, that have broadly adaptable, their range is very large. So red maple goes all the way west to the break where it starts to dry out, and when it changes from tall grass to short grass prairie in the Midwest, and east from Canada to the Gulf of, who are the people on the Caribbean islands? Let's call it that. And then regional adaptation, which is the argument I'm going to push for. But really, we got to try all of these things. Things are so dire and things are so serious. We can't just try, like I got this great idea I'm going to present here. We should be trying all of these things and seeing and just watching and in an iterative process learn and then try and improve all along the way. So the approach number 1, plant as many species as possible, see what happens. Number 2, yeah, I just described that. We've tried a bunch of things in Eugene, including contracting with nurseries, trialing new trees, growing our own trees. I have 500 trees in my backyard. Climate tree, we've set up a network of people working on this, and we have conferences and talk about this. And then tree selection summits, we're like, Portland started this, and we brought it down to Eugene, where a bunch of arborists, landscapers, landscape designers, people all over the field get together and talk about what we're doing, what's working, what's not doing. And we tried trucking using diesel trees from California up here and planting them, and now we're trying to grow them our own here from seed. The worry was that we're going to be the ones. Friends of Trees imports California pest into Oregon, and one time we found a pink gelatinous growth on a tree, and it turned out it was a pathogen that's already here. So this is, when we started out, we created these tiers. And so tier 1 was this is what's available locally in the nursery trade. And we looked at it, and almost everything there is not climate resilient. And so, but we chose the ones that are, like There's Oregon white oak. And that's a drought-tolerant tree. And so we created this tier 1, ones that we can get, that you can find in the nursery trade. Sorry, can y'all hear me? Yeah. Okay. So ones that you can find in the nursery trade, and we identified those as ones we wanted to prioritize, our tier 1 trees. Then we had tier 2 trees were ones that weren't in the nursery trade commonly, but some nurseries grew them and they were widespread in California. And so we worked with the nurseries. Now, many of those species like Chinese pistache, Turkish filbert, all the first 5 are widely grown and available now. So that took 15 years. But a bunch of these, there's really no one growing them, so we're developing networks to grow them ourselves. And then tier 3 are trees that do well in similar climates to ours. There's 6 regions on the world that have summer drought climates like ours. So who wants to see if they can name one? Summer drought Mediterranean climates. There's 6 parts of the world. The Mediterranean, yes. And then there's an entire continent. Australia, Patagonia, the border between Europe and Asia, and the western United States. Those are the summer drought regions of the world. That's where I'm arguing that I'm arguing it in priority level. We should start with the trees that are native right here in Cottage Grove, and then in concentric rings outward, we should go to western natives, California natives, and then start moving to other summer drought climates. And so some of these trees are ones we're experimenting with. All of these we have found some and have started planting them around Eugene and Springfield. These are ones that should be reduced, in my view. These are ones that are not summer drought tolerant and we expect to die with climate change. These are the main trees in our cities. None of them are drought tolerant. And if you're planting them, you're doing it for, you're either, well, I'm not going to say. But that's primarily what we plant, our trees on this list and other trees like that. So the regional approach I'm going to argue for is for, like I said, starting with the region right around here, then moving south into the inland valleys of California. And I'm just remembering the piece I left out about those 2 floras moving north and south. What makes it work so well here and what makes it make sense to move things north is that we have north-south coast range, north-south inland valley system, north-south Cascades and Sierras, so that as climate changed in those giant processes that I described, they didn't move to the east, they didn't move to the west, they moved north, and then they moved south when it cooled. And so what that leads to is this idea of, after this local area moving south to California, that the real broad general area that we're within is from northwest Baja to southwest British Columbia in the inland valleys, the dry areas. That's where 80% of all people are, all the major cities are. Once you get to Southern California, it changes around in between LA and San Francisco and San Diego, things change. But basically from Baja to BC, growing largely from seed. What we would like to do is copy the organic food industry, which is developed locally, regionally adapted seed that is called OP, or open pollinated, meaning that it uses traditional crop breeding to breed things that go true from seed but have particular characteristics. That's what they do out at Dorina. The mad scientist out there is doing incredible work. And because he uses traditional crop breeding. What the big nursery seed catalogs, they sell F1 hybrids, which are crossing 2 things to get incredible vigor and to get certain characteristics, but they don't breed true from seed, and they're owned by other people. So if you want to be regionally self-sufficient, you can't use that seed. And so we want to take that approach, and there's this amazing young people working on these regionally adapted vegetable seeds and take that to trees and shrubs and other things. And so there's a great company called Adaptive Seeds that has gone all around the world to find vegetable seeds that they think are adapted to this climate and trialed them repeatedly and chosen the best varieties from around the world. Just in Serbia, I think they brought 1,000 different strains of vegetable seeds back and started trialing them. We want to do that with trees. And so when I did that presentation, the last one with Keith Warren, and I said, have you ever thought about like doing traditional crop breeding with our native plants and trying to get an Oregon ash that's resistant to anthracnose, or to choose trees that have the kind of characteristics that you like and some disease resistant, madrone blight resilience, tolerance. And he said he got interested in California black oak and started a breeding program on that. And then when sudden oak death came to our area, they threw out all their research. There was great research in the 1910s by Luther Burbank, the famous plant breeder who gave us, if you ever go to a McDonald's, you're eating French fries that he developed the potato for, the Burbank potato. And he was in Santa Rosa, California, and his backyard was the most brilliant plant breeder on earth, maybe except Vasilov in Russia. And he took our native camas and crossed it with the Rocky Mountain camas and came up with a bulb this big. And he bred our native brodias and other things, and he created them into food crops that were could be used in conventional agriculture. And then he died and everything was lost. And so that's kind of happened with our native trees, and we hope to begin to be working on that. So when we first started trialing trees, we were just looking at trees, what's growing 500 miles south of here? And we started with these 4 trees: coast live oak, interior live oak, blue oak, and valley oak. And we bought liners. One of the important things is known provenance, so knowing where the seeds come from. And we're getting a lot of stuff from around Mount Shasta area. We started working with nurseries and trying to find out, this is a conventional nursery growing ash trees. And they're all going to die from emerald ash borer. We tried to build relationships with these people and try and find ways that help them make money and lead. It's really tough to make money as a nurseryman because the bottom line in the competition is so ruthless. And you're always on the edge of losing your business. And so we tried to help their business and get them growing the trees that would help us by ensuring markets for them. So we tried to help them find markets to grow more drought-tolerant trees. We tried to reward quality stock with high prices, and now we just got massive funding for R&D, and it's just got all cut away. And what we'd really like is, what I'm mentioning here is a long-term breeding program for local adaptation. An example, we have this amazing place outside Cottage Grove that has developed white pine, blister rust, sugar pine, western white pine, now has disease-resistant Port Orford cedar, and is working on resistance for American chestnut. It's amazing. Just using traditional crop breeding. They tried injecting the wheat gene into the American chestnut to get resistance, didn't work. They tried breeding it with the Asian and got resistance, and then tried to crossbreed, back cross out the Asian to get a pureblood American, and they ended up with a weird mutated thing. So he's trying to use traditional crop breeding to get that. And so some example is, we plant Oregon white oak. Most of the ones I planted were selected from acorns growing in really rich river loam. But we want to be able to plant them in heavy clay soils as well, where they do well if you plant ones from heavy clay soil. We now know that evolution changes the bodies of things within 3 generations. We used to think thousands of generations. Now we know within 3 generations you get major adaptive genetic change. So these are some of the ones that we initially want to work on and have doing some work. There's my favorite tree. And so this tree is plagued with madrone blight. You might see its leaves turn completely black sometimes, and then they'll just die and new ones will come out, thankfully. So I'm part of this group, the Madrone Army, which is Arbutus menziesii, ARME, and trying to, we're part of this giant long-term study of madrone blight resistance. And so selections have been made from Baja to BC, and they're all being trialed in different places, and we're selecting ones that are blight resistant. We're also trying to learn how to grow them. Half of all madrones we plant die, and we think it's related to soil relationships. So some good things that are happening, as I mentioned, the resurgence of cultural fire. There's finally demand. I was just at a conference, and the buyer for Portland Urban Forestry was at the conference trying to find anybody to buy 20,000 climate resilient trees of certain species. And there's no one growing them except this little tiny nursery in Talon, Oregon. So there's a growth opportunity there. Portland has a cool program. It just got its funding cut, but they've been following trees to see how they're surviving with climate change for 20 years. And we need more studies like that. And they're doing these really cool climate trials. We've been trying this. City of Eugene has the best approved street tree list maybe in the country now, and we're trying to get other cities to take that approach. And then we're starting to see a backlash against cultivars. So a cultivar is like Red Point red maple. That is a selection that's owned by a corporation. And so we're trying to go back. And so what you get with a cultivar is uniformity. And that's what the nursery industry wants, is because they want people to know exactly that it's going to have its fall color on October 12th. And it's going to look exactly like a pyramid. And so that's what you can get with, because they're all clones. And eventually when you do a clone of a clone, and some of it's been done for over 100 generations now, you get some interesting things that happen. But we're trying to go back and emphasize what we call intra-specific diversity, which is diversity within a species' own genetics. And it's vast. And when you clone something, you take all of that away. And what that gives you is adaptivity to change. And so by focusing on stopping cultivars and starting to plant things from seed, you don't get the uniformity, but you get adaptive genetic diversity. And there's starting to be some recognition that we're not the only thing in the world, and that not us or non-humans should get some investment and planting for their benefit. And so we're particularly around pollinators, people are starting to care. And so that's leading to more planting of beneficial things for them. There's that intra-specific. For planting trees, cities typically require that you plant these gigantic unwieldy trees that volunteers can't even pick up with 4 of them. And we're really, arboriculture's in the dark ages and is struggling to find its way out. And we've been pioneering. Thankfully, we have people who have helped us for 20 years now. We've been planting smaller stock trees. First we did it illegally, and then we got the approval of City of Eugene. Now City of Eugene's doing it. Portland's resisted it for 20 years. We've lobbied them, and they finally are going to come down and follow us in City of Eugene around and consider changing their requirements to plant smaller stock trees. So instead of planting an 8-year-old tree, you could plant a 2 to 4-year-old tree. And that requires much less money, watering, time, and the tree is established better. And profiling of natives. native trees have dealt with racial profiling for a long time. It's really ugly. It's really hard to talk about long-standing, but things that have been here for 3 million years, the plants that have been here, they have rights. This is their land. And we come in and we drown them in red maples. And it hasn't worked out that well. And so another thing we can do, just basic technical stuff, is not limbing up trees like we do. It has a ton of drawbacks and no benefits I'm aware of, but we're stuck on doing it. Starting to underplant the trees along our strips. This road construction project is going to lead to, y'all didn't invest in trees to go in after this road construction project, and so they're going to plant little trees in boxes and kill them and replace them every 10 years. Is what I was just told tonight. So we should be investing in, at least on every block, room for 2 or 3 large canopy trees. Is that too much to ask? I don't think so. But when we do plant them, then we can underplant with natives that are really good wildflowers and shrubs that are really good for pollinators and other critters. Planting more bare root trees saves money, effort, and time. It's got to take some work to do it with some of the climate resilient trees. In the southern Willamette Valley here, or the upper Willamette Valley, we have some heavy clay soils that we need to do some crop breeding work with. Some really basic things I wish we tried was focusing on I'll wrap this up, on the precautionary principle and trying to avoid irreversible change. And we ought to look at the idea that we can solve problems or save things. I totally question that. It's been mathematically refuted that we can use reason to solve problems without creating other ones. These are some of the things that I'm trying to incorporate into this regionally adaptive approach. Assisted migration is a big controversy. I've been going and interviewing extension agents who work with our native trees and asking them, what are your worries? What are you concerned about with assisted migration? And the big one is that genes in Oregon white oak or any other native tree for disease resistant, and when they start to cross-pollinate with blue oak and some of these other oaks, they may lose that disease resistance. And so there's some risks. There's several other risks. There's also several benefits. And it's playing God. There's no way around it. When you're taking something and you're bringing it to another area and saying, this is your land now. So we got to really think about this as we do it. One big thing in the way is the native plant restoration complex, and which is, I'm not even going to get into what I think about the pure blood concept that you often hear in that. But we got to get past it and start planting natives, but also being okay with non-natives that are very suitable. For instance, silver linden is a non-native tree that's drought tolerant, climate resilient, tolerates really tough sites, and is better than any of our native trees for our bumblebees, which are dying off the earth. So maybe there's some situations where those are okay. And people like me who plant them don't have to be called traitors and things because it's not native. These are some questions that I often get asked, so I'm hoping you all will ask them later. Why are so few native trees allowed along city streets? Why are fruit trees prohibited as street trees? How do we get more subsistence trees that are good for food, fiber, and medicine? How do we get them onto the landscape? And almost all of them are not suited to climate change or not drought tolerant, except for figs and a couple others. So how do we address that? So here's us trying to learn from the past for the future, and these are these beautiful oaks by the Oregon Eugene Lane County Fairgrounds, and then this is what people in the nursery industry want from a tree. It's upright, has a central leader. Oregon white oak often gets denigrated and has been denigrated my whole time, 35 years working with trees. And It's been the #1 tree we planted in Eugene for 2 years in a row now. And so there's hope for that. In Eugene, we plant around the U of O campus where packs of young men on PBR on Saturday nights after the ducks lose attack trees and destroy them. And we've developed ways to not dig them up and replace them, but to cut them to the base and regrow them on the streets. This is by the Albertsons on 18th and Chambers. They're twice that big now, ones that we planted. And thank you.